Participate in today's webinar sponsored by the Minnesota Gerontological Society and the University of Minnesota Center on Aging, MAGIC. MAGIC is the Minnesota Area Geriatric Education Center. Many people have expressed interest in our critical topic today of the workforce shortages, challenges, and solutions in aging services. My name is Catherine Ringham, and I will be the moderator today for this webinar. I'm currently working as a clinical supervisor with the Minnesota Family Memory Program, as well as a new member of the MGS board. These monthly webinars have become a hallmark of MGS program offerings, and we want to continue to bring timely topics to you and to your organization. More details and information about upcoming webinars can be found on the MGS's website, mngero.org, that is mngero.org. If you go to our MGS website, then to the Conferences, Webinars tab, you'll be able to download a PDF of the slides for today's webinar. A few logistics. Your conference audio is muted. If you have a question for the speaker, and questions are encouraged, please feel free to type the question in the question box at the bottom of your screen or the question mark icon. If you have to leave before the webinar early, just close your browser and hang up on the phone. If you have other questions or concerns, please feel free to email us at the MGS website. After the webinar today, an evaluation survey will be emailed to you to complete, or an evaluation will be emailed to you tomorrow if you do not complete the evaluation immediately at the end. We're very interested in learning what you liked, what you didn't like, what you think we can do better, and any future topic ideas. Further information on CEU continuing education credits will be available at the end of the webinar. You must complete the evaluation survey and list your name and email under the CEU question to receive a certificate. There are a few groups at facilities that are participating. If each person wants a CEU certificate, the supervisor or person completing the survey after the webinar should list each staff person and their email in the survey question about the CEU certificates. The only way we can assure that each person who wants a CEU gets one is if their name and email appear in that question. And as a reminder, the CEUs are a no-cost benefit for MGS members and $25 for non-members. Our speaker today is Adam Samala, Vice President of Strategic Affiliation Leading Age Minnesota. He is responsible for workforce development initiatives of the association, where he has over 14 years of experience designing and leading healthcare workforce projects. Adam serves on the HSS Registered Apprenticeship Advisory Council and HealthForce Minnesota Executive Alliance. We are very, very happy to have Adam be our presenter today on the topic of workforce solutions for aging services careers. Welcome, Adam.
Thanks, Catherine, and good afternoon, everybody. It is a pleasure to be with you, and as a new MGS board member myself, to be working with such a fine organization. I'm going to walk through information relatively quickly today, and at a couple points we're going to pause and take questions. So if at any point you have questions and you want to throw them over to Catherine on your chat function, please feel free to do that, and I'll make sure that we take time to dig into any specific questions you might have. But with that, let's get started. As I mentioned, or as Catherine mentioned, I work for Leading Age Minnesota. We are a state association representing older adult service providers, really all of the stakeholders that are driven to transform and enhance that experience of aging. And in my role for the association, a lot of what I get to work on is being out in the community, talking with organizations, from education to providers, to figure out what's working well that we can showcase and replicate, and what's not working well that we can develop strategies, shared strategies around workforce development. And when we go out and talk with folks, if there's one area where, when I ask people, what's your burning platform, what's that one thing that is keeping you up at night and causing the biggest challenge, hands down it's workforce. Regardless of line of business, regardless of geography, our ability to inspire and retain our staff in the aging services field is a major challenge for all providers. In large part, this is driven by demographics. And as many of you know, Minnesota is a rapidly aging state. And as we make our way from that 2010 to 2030 mark on this slide, our access to available caregivers is going to continue to decrease. Our availability of a labor force in Minnesota is going to shrink to almost nothing. So we're really challenged as we look out over the next few years. Last fall, members of our staff and executive committee went out and asked providers, how's the morale out there? What are you hearing from staff? And indeed, we did see that there is beginning to be some erosion in positive morale. Conversations around, staff is stretched, staff is struggling, have turned into a deeper challenge. Phrases like mandating people to stay or burnout, fear, is the tenor of the conversation is definitely changing. And that's not surprising when you start to look at some of the numbers that we're talking about. When we look just at our care centers in Minnesota, this year that number of open positions in just 3 job categories, those that are probably the most strained in our field, of RN, LPN, and nursing assistant, is over 2,500 jobs. And if you look over the course of the last few years, that number continues to rise. Last year, we actually added over 1,000 more jobs that are open in our field than there were last year. And we know, as we look at the demographics and as we look at the service need, we're going to continue to see both retirements and new positions coming online. So the challenge is not going away. What that means for the average Minnesota care center is that they have about 7 open positions, 1 for a registered nurse, 1 for a licensed practical nurse, and 5 nursing assistants or frontline direct caregivers. That's over 2 jobs more than they had last year. So that's a little snapshot of what's going on out there in the average Minnesota care center. If we look at vacancy rates, in RN, it's about 12% statewide. And you can see, based on your geographic region of the state, sort of what that number looks like specifically. A little bit higher in the metro area, which tends to churn through people in positions a little bit faster than greater Minnesota. If we look at the LPN, it again holds that line at about 12%, with the highest area in the state at about 20% being northeastern Minnesota. As we move to nursing assistant registered, we can see that number goes up to 14.4%. And that number continues to rise every year. So about 14% of those positions that are currently on the books that we would love to fill are currently open. And that lines up pretty clearly with what we're hearing from members. Last fall, we went out again and asked some folks, where are you finding it difficult to recruit? And 2/3 of providers said, yeah, it's that frontline caregiver. It's that direct workforce that we're really struggling to recruit and to retain. When we look at turnover rate in the nursing community, we're at about 47% statewide. I don't know what the perfect number for retention is or turnover is, but I can tell you it's a lot better than 47% as a field as we look at moving forward. Nursing, in particular, is a challenge for us. And you can see at graduation, over half of the nurses that graduate from programs actually start in older adult services in care centers. But over the course of just 18 months, we only retain about 13% of those. So the majority of nurses, and this is probably not a shocker to anyone that's on the call that's a provider, they begin with us, but we lose them to the hospital. And in large part, that's probably not shocking when you look at the wage gap. For that RN, compared in a care center compared to a hospital, that person is making $37,000 a year more in the hospital. If you're bringing home a paycheck for your family, that's not much of a choice. And if you look down at the nursing assistant line item there, our state average at about $12.17, but that equates to over $12,000 in an annual differential between that nursing assistant in the hospital and a nursing assistant in the care center. Home care, home and community-based services, assisted living really captured in that gray bar under home care, pretty on par with what's happening in the care center environment. Statewide, this year we actually saw the direct care staff at nursing assistant go over 50% for turnover. And again, I don't know what the perfect number is. It depends on your region. It depends on if you're in a college town. But I would guess that an industry standard should be closer to 10% than it should be 50%. So we are seeing a pretty sizable challenge there. We also last fall started to ask providers, have you had to suspend admissions because you didn't have enough staff? And about 1/3 of our members said, yeah, that is something we've had to do. With our friends in the Imperative, we actually did a statewide survey of all sites, and we found that, in fact, 45% of Minnesota care centers in the last year had suspended admissions, not because they didn't have open beds, not because they didn't have community demand, but because they didn't have that frontline caregiving staff to be providing that service. So as available caregivers decline, so does access to Minnesota services. On the senior housing side, for those of you that work in assisted living or senior housing, we see those numbers be better than they are on the care center side, but at the same time, they're going up. So 14% on the care center side, 7% for home care aides. You know, that's great. It's a much improved environment, but it's still getting harder every single year. Turnover, again, looking at that RN or that home care aide, a standard on the care center side currently at over 50%, on the home care aide side 35%, so a better but worsening environment. Okay, so that's the bad news. That's the set of challenges. Probably not a shocker to anyone out there. I think I'm preaching to the choir in large part. You know the challenges and you know what they result in on the floor or in your communities, that burnout, that sense of frustration. And from here on out, I want to make sure that we're looking at strategies, ways in which we can take that data, because it's not new. We've been looking at this challenge as a field for several years now. Looking at that growth in demand, looking at our ability to recruit, retain, and train those staff that work in our organization or could work in our organization. But my challenge to you is, as we move forward, it's not enough that we just know that information. It's a challenge for us as organizations to begin positioning to really make meaningful change. And before I jump into sort of my top 10 list of strategies that organizations could begin working on or are already working on, Catherine, if I could ask you to come back on the line and see if there's any questions that folks might have as we get started. Anything you want to make sure that we cover today, or anything that I've said so far that you want to dig a little bit deeper into. Feel free to write that question in, and Catherine, if there's anything, just let me know.
Adam, right at this point, there is no direct questions about the information, but I'm sure we'll be getting some.
All right, sounds good. In that case, I'm going to press on, and again, if you have questions, please feel free to jot those on your chat function. Strategy number one, since so much of what happens in our workforce outlook is involving the regulations and funding we get from the state and federal government, policy solutions has to be goal number one for organizations looking at strategies. As the long-term care imperative, we have identified 3 key session priorities for the 2015 legislative session, and one of them, front and center, is our ability to address the shortage in caregivers throughout Minnesota. To do that, we have 3 main goals: to provide a livable wage, to create career pathways, and to level that playing field in our employment marketplace. To accomplish that, we have a series of activities that we're engaged in around grants. We have, in large part, had a wonderful program in the Minnesota Nursing Facility Employee Scholarship Program, accessible for Minnesota care centers. However, we no longer have a program for home and community-based service providers. We want to reestablish a program for home and community-based service providers. We also want to enhance the ability of that existing nursing facility scholarship program to do more, to be more accessible, and to provide funding to folks that it doesn't currently. We want to look at some targeted funding to our workforce partners and different stakeholders. And then finally, we want to take advantage of a lot of energy and good conversations occurring around dual training models in Minnesota, in particular the ability to move forward with apprenticeship programs. And we'll talk a little bit later about one of those as an example. To accomplish this work and to move this forward, here's one homework assignment. If you haven't already checked it out, it's our Face Aging Minnesota website. It's an opportunity for us to reposition this conversation around policy issues as they relate to Minnesota workforce more broadly. And you'll be hearing more about this from Patty Cullen and my colleague Jody Boyne in the next month's MGS webinar. So I'm not going to steal any of their thunder, but I do encourage you not to waste any time in checking out that Face Aging conversation. One of the policy conversations that you won't see in our agenda this year, but is something that we're tracking, is feedback that we've had from employers saying, sometimes we have staff that would be able to pick up additional shifts, and they want to pick up additional shifts, but they can't do so Hang on just a second. Can folks hear me?
Yes, Adam, we can hear you. It looks like your video is...
Adam, this is Catherine. Yes, we can hear.
You're okay? All right. All of a sudden, it showed me that my connection was lost. But I'm okay?
Yes.
All right. Well, we'll just keep plugging ahead then. So anyway, we have staff that could pick up additional shifts, but can't for fear of losing access to benefit programs, childcare, meal, food budgets. It's something that's bigger than a one-session conversation, but I wanted to let people know that we are, in fact, moving forward with that conversation. Okay, so let's jump into something that we know everything about evidence and research-based investigations into the healthcare workforce makes a difference, and that's recognition strategies. For the last couple years now, we've been pulling together examples of what works around meaningful recognition, in particular with customized recognition, and that information is housed on our Stars Among Us Recognition Center website, and everybody can access that. Check it out on our website, leadingagemn.org. You'll find details for team leaders, for team members. It's an easy way for you to be developing that implementation plan for how you are going to do recognition, meaningful recognition with your team. How are you going to train those leaders and managers to do that work?
Hey, Adam? Excuse me, this is Tom. It does look like your computer's frozen up because we're stuck on one slide.
Is it the Stars Among Us slide?
No, it's the faceaging.org slide.
Any suggestions on how I fix
yes,
that?
I think what you may have to do, if everybody can just be patient, if you wouldn't mind logging out and logging back in, we'll just wait on you, and then we'll pick it up from there. So if everybody can just be patient and give Adam a chance.
Be thinking about your questions, people.
So Adam, can you go ahead and just log out and then log back in?
I am doing that right now,
Okay.
Tom. And if folks have any questions in the meantime, I'm happy to have that conversation.
Yes, because we'll be able to hear you. So please type in your questions for Catherine.
Adam, there is one question from Tracy that says, where is the information on the recognition strategies on the Leading Age webpage?
Sure. Tracy, so you're going to click on Provider Resources, and then or actually, you know what, go up to the very top of our website where it says Workforce Center, and if you click on that, one of the menu options on the left side of the screen, once you're on that Workforce Center, is going to be Recognition Strategies, or the Recognition Resource Center. You'll also find information there about the Stars Among Us awards program, which is another component to that conversation. Our ability to recognize staff, pretty important on that front.
So as everyone can see, Adam just logged out, and if you can just be patient with us, he's going to log back in and hopefully regain his connection, and we'll pick up the slideshow.
Sorry about that, everybody. Am I back up on your screen?
We can hear you, but I'm going to make it so that you'll be the presenter. So just a moment. Yes, you're back up.
All right. All right. Sorry about that. Hopefully that doesn't happen again. I'm not quite sure what went on with that, but we'll just keep moving forward kind of quickly, and we'll try to catch up here. So another strategy that I'd want to chat with folks about, besides recognition, and there's a lot more in-depth information, as Tracy is probably finding out on the website there, is strategies related to business partners. One of the things that we find is that as a field, we work with a lot of organizations, and there is an opportunity for them to help us with those challenges. For example, for those of you that participate in that Value First contract, you can access 25% savings on a telephone program for your staff. Now, when I'm making a decision about whether or not I work for an organization, that's a good thing to look at a benefit. Or products that are out there that help reduce the number of FTEs. This is a picture of a care center that at 11 a.m. That has finished all of their laundry for the day because they have a new sheet system with Encompass that doesn't require folding and dries in a substantially less amount of time. I don't work for Encompass, and it's just an example of a product that's out there. The challenge really here is how do you talk with your business partners about your workforce challenges and have them help you resolve some of those challenges. Strategy number 4 is related to insurance solutions. For those of you that have insurance as a benefit within your organization, I would encourage you to provide a total compensation statement for staff. We work with an organization called Hanratty. This is a kind of an example of the cover of that. Organizations invest a large amount of resources into their team members that doesn't necessarily transfer to people's minds. Making sure that they have access to what that full picture looks like is really important. I'd also encourage us to figure out ways in which we can begin knocking down benefit concerns for staff. One of the resources that Minnesota has is MNsure, and people are probably not aware of how much they qualify for around different benefits. So if access to health care for a team member's children is a major challenge for them, let's help connect them. MNsure has put on the table the opportunity to connect with navigators, coming out to organizations, working individually with people to help them access the insurance solutions that work best for them. I'd encourage folks to take a look at what MNsure or your agent has. If you have any questions about that or need some help, Joe O'Kane is our insurance advisor here in our office and is happy to be a free resource for anyone that's interested in taking that step forward. Catherine, any questions bubbling up from folks that you want to make sure that we touch base on?
No, there are none at this point, but we'll wait for a little.
All right, well, let's keep going through. Strategy number 5 is about healthy workplaces. And this is a conversation that if I had to say, where are people spending a lot of time and energy, it's around healthy workplaces. How do we become an employer of choice? And when I say healthy workplace, what jumps into your mind? You know, what do you begin thinking about? In large part, what I hope folks are thinking about is opportunities for us to get beyond that kind of an old school mentality that you check your problems at the door, you're on work time now. The reality is staff are bringing to us drama and chaos and life in a way that they haven't in the past. And as employers, it's our opportunity and responsibility to really be connecting with them in a meaningful way and responding to help them with some of those pieces. It's about building in practices as an organization that promote physical, mental well-being. A large way that organizations are attacking this challenge is around that onboarding process, that ability to connect with staff right from the get-go on the best possible footing. So my challenge to you all is give some thought to what do the first 6 hours in your organization look like for a new team member. Do they begin with a cohort, which research shows us produces a better result? Because it's hard to be the new kid on the block. Do You connect them with access to resources. You talk with them about the why of what it is you do, the values of your organization, the investment that you're going to be making in them as a new team member, the different career pathways that they can explore as an employee of your organization. Those are the types of opportunities we have to connect with folks. Really be warm and welcoming, and following up with them over the course of that first year of employment. After 60 days, you touch base with them and say, what's confused you, or what do you see as a challenge, or something that maybe shouldn't be happening? What's something we can work on to make that process better? That onboarding, that orientation process is where a lot of organizations are investing time and energy and resources. There's also an opportunity as employers to begin asking the question around what barriers exist for people. And I've seen these conversations unfolding in really powerful ways where organizations have started to connect with staff on, what are your life challenges and how can we help knock some of those things down for you to get you to be your best self at work. I was up in an organization in northern Minnesota, and I walked through the dining room, and they had a sign that said, team member meals, $1.42. For $1.42, that staff person gets a warm, hot, nutritious meal. That might be the only meal they get that day that fits those criteria. That's something that organization put on the table as a healthy workplace practice. Other organizations are figuring out ways in which they can help identify daycare services or be more flexible. If there was a general trend around what this looks like as employers, it's being flexible, it's being creative, it's exploring new ways to provide services that we've never done before. It could be job sharing, it could be changing and redesigning positions, it could be evaluating new hours. Putting some of those questions out there and responding as managers is a big practice. Another great practice of a healthy workplace is staff satisfaction surveys. I was pretty surprised when we went out recently and asked members how many folks do staff satisfaction surveys. Not very many, not as many as I would think. About half of our field, it looked like, was doing staff satisfaction. And if you're going to do this, I absolutely encourage you to make sure you have written action plans. Because sometimes asking a question like this without the follow-through is worse than asking the question, or not asking the question to begin with. Here are 6 questions that we, through our Workforce Council and our Quality Council, have identified as the best indicators of staff satisfaction. And we're going to be looking at how we can help organizations benchmark these 6 questions. No matter whether you use a paid service, whether it's a paper form you've developed yourself, if you ask these 6 questions, we'll be able to help you benchmark them across the state and across different regions. Strategy number 6, career investments. Being able and taking that opportunity to invest in the staff that work for us. A lot of what I think people struggle with is they don't feel like we're appropriately training, or they don't have the answers they need, the tools they need to do their jobs. And there's a ton of different programs. All of the state associations in Minnesota have a whole host of programs. MGS is another great resource for you, and hopefully I'll see everybody at the conference coming up in April, or other webinars that are available free on the website going forward. But being able to really invest in staff is a key challenge. Another homework assignment, if folks are interested, I encourage you to go check out the new healthsupportspecialist.org website. This is a strategy around how do we reframe the frontline direct caregiver position in Minnesota. It's one of the biggest, boldest solutions that we've seen move forward. And it's a challenge for us as organizations as we struggle with that I'm just a nursing assistant mindset, which kills me. As we look at reduced access to staff, as we look at the question of why do people work in our field and why do they leave our field, and begin to sort of systematically redesign the positions we have to respond to that feedback from our staff. So what we've done with Health Support Specialists is to look at a series of strategies, and I'll just sort of walk through sort of what our approach to this project was. It was to create a new career in the field of older adult services, one that could crosswalk home care, assisted living, skilled care centers, that full spectrum of older adult services. It's an opportunity for organizations to have a catalyst in their person-directed living, their culture change movement. It's built upon lessons from some of our pioneering members out there that are actively, organically exploring new career models and blending different roles and embracing different training models, really embracing the fact that as employers, we're not just hiring people that have been trained somewhere, but we are in fact training them ourselves. And it's of course designed around that concept of a blended worker household model of care, making sure that people are cross-trained to do whatever that resident needs. The change that we seek in the field is to increase providers' ability to recruit, retain, and inspire that talent. If there is an area around workforce where we are foolishly spending money, it's in turnover. And if we could take that money, and roughly I would say if you imagine a staff salary, about 50% of that person's salary is what you end up spending recruiting and retraining and getting that new person into that position. If you add up all of that money for all of those open positions that we're turning over, that's a tremendous amount of resources that we could be reinvesting in different ways. So even if the pot of money doesn't increase, our ability to spend it differently does. And finally, our final goal, if we weren't or are not able to increase staff satisfaction and the quality outcomes and resident satisfaction scores, we wouldn't have done this project due justice. But in fact, we are seeing that happen. So what is it? HSS is a 7 online course college program. It's 9 college credits, or 145 hours. It's 2,500 hours of on-the-job learning. So it's that, that ability for us to learn in the classroom and then instantly apply it, that earning while learning model. You have to be 18 years or older. You have to have a high school diploma or GED. You do have to be a nursing assistant. And you also have to have support from your employer. So this is a closed enrollment program. It's that ability for that employer to invest in a set staff person. What are the courses? Working with providers and the best curriculum writers we had in Minnesota from the Minnesota State Colleges and University system, we looked at developing those core competencies that are going to crosswalk across all of those fields. The program for HSS opens with a 3-credit session called Introduction to Health Support Specialists, where the team member learns about online learning. They learn about the history of our field. They learn person-directed values and philosophy. They learn conflict management, communication, a lot of those life skills that we hear people struggle with. The other courses, meaningful activities, culinary care, environmental services, memory care, psychosocial, and physiological care, fully round out that caregiver. So whatever that older adult needs, they understand the working of that older adult and how they need to move forward. They have the tools they need to do an enhanced job. Part of the challenge we have is our service field has radically changed. The people we're caring for are particularly more frail than they've been in the past. The influx of short-stay rehab, vents, trachs, a lot of complex medical care is being delivered in aging services, yet our training model hasn't evolved. So our opportunity here is to really recast that direct caregiver job. What does that investment look like for organizations? It's about $190 per course, or per credit, I should say, for a total of $1,710, which, as someone who's finishing up a graduate degree for substantially more than that per credit, let me tell you, MnSCU has given us a great deal. And again, all of that is 100% reimbursed through the Minnesota Nursing Facility Employee Scholarship Program. That we've had the Department of Human Services working alongside us through this whole process. They've been wonderfully supportive, and it's a great opportunity to make that investment and to get that cost reimbursed through the state. As an employer sponsor site, if your organization is interested in moving into the HSS model and elevating your direct caregivers, one of the steps that's a little different as a registered apprenticeship program, because that's new, this is the only one in healthcare that we're aware of in Minnesota, is to identify a wage matrix. So you have to say, when someone comes into our organization, here's what we pay. As they make their way through the health support specialist program, whether it's every class they take, every chunk of hours they accomplish, we're going to be working towards that journey worker or kind of complete health support specialist wage. Along that way, to do that work, the Department of Labor's Registered Apprenticeship Unit has been wonderfully helpful and will actually come out to your organization and assist. We also have a full team here at Leading Edge Minnesota to provide counsel, and we call them our transformation coaches. Marilyn, Sandy, and Sally are on staff and able to assist organizations. They go out and do individual customized implementation plans to really make sure that your site is fully implementing this in the smartest way possible. As operators themselves, they're able to answer those technical questions that I can't answer. And then they've built a strong regional rural hub network of learning labs and support, both for the apprentices going through the program and for the coordinators on site to make sure that they're well supported on your staff. So for organizations that are interested, let us know. We'd be happy to come out and do a leadership team meeting. We have an online evaluation based on the artifacts of culture change. And then we do a site visit with the transformation coaches. All of that's complimentary. There's no charge to that. That's part of a grant that we received through the Margaret A. Cargill Foundation for the next 3 years to bring this program to scale throughout the state of Minnesota. And on the website, under Become a Sponsor site, in addition to hearing the voices of people that have gone through this, so you can sort of get some of those videos and watch some of those stories, you'll also have access to the standards. So you can see the learning objectives and what it is people actually have to do. Strategy number 7, workforce partnerships. I know a lot of times it can feel like you are alone out there trying to squeeze that blood from the turnip, trying to find people and find partners in training. And workforce partnerships exist throughout Minnesota. A great one that I would encourage you to connect with is your local workforce center, your local workforce council. There's 50 workforce centers in the state of Minnesota and 16 different workforce regions. Each one of them has a board. If you don't know your local workforce director by their first name, if they're not sure what positions you're hiring for and looking for, you have some work to do there, and I would encourage you to do that. We're hoping to have a member serve on every single workforce center board in the state of Minnesota. Another great related network that's at that table and also in your community is Minnesota State Colleges and Universities, the University of Minnesota system, and the nonprofit private college system. These are partners that I would encourage you to reach out to. If you are not a clinical placement site, if you are not connecting with them to make sure that they are clear about what it is you are looking to connect within your organization, what open positions you have, I would encourage you to reach out and to do just that. In the interest of time, I'm not going to spend much time walking through a recent study of clinical sites that HealthForce Minnesota just did. If you're interested, you do have some information on your handout, or you can certainly reach out to the HealthForce Minnesota team. But I would encourage you to look at the resources available to make sure that your local college is really connecting in the best possible way with you as a clinical site. All right, I'm going to pause for some questions, but before I do, I'm going to make just a general observation about one of the things that I see happening in our field. And we used this analogy in the past to talk about what happens when funding at the Capitol dries up, that the animals around the watering hole look at each other a little different when the water starts to dry up. One of the challenges we have in our field is how do you become an employer of choice in your community, and how do you work collaboratively with your partners in the region? One of the things that I would encourage you to think about and sort of frame your workforce development work is how do we do that work better together? There's obviously you have to be employers of choice, and we have to try to recruit positions within our organization. But if we just look at that from a competitive angle, I think we're going to be losing something that has been an important culture, at least within our organization and within our field broadly. So my challenge to you is to be thinking not just about how you at your organization moves forward, but how do we do that work together? How do we build shared staffing models? All right, any questions before I move on to workforce funding? Catherine, anybody with a burning question?
Yes, Adam, there are two that relate to wages. The first one from Mary Jo says, competitive wages seem the most important attribute for retention. Would you agree with this conclusion? If so, do you see compensation being adjusted in the next 12 months? And this, let me add the second one because it's similar. This is from Jess. Thanks, Adam. How do you respond to the stance that many of these issues, challenges will simply not change until wages and benefits rise? People will almost always follow higher wages.
Yeah. So I think that the participants have a really fair point, and yes, we are actively working on redesigning a new Minnesota nursing facility reimbursement system that takes into account that and makes substantial increases in the rates that are paid, which about 70% of those rates go directly into wages and benefits for our staff. So yes, there's a direct link between reimbursement and workforce, and I think that is absolutely hands down a big part of the solution. That's why it was policy solutions was strategy number one. And we are working on that as a statewide network through the long-term care imperative. I'd encourage you to share your voice in that conversation, share your stories, and get engaged in that process. However, and here's my qualifier, it's not the only answer. In some of the organizations that are out there that, for example, are hospital-attached care centers that have one wage structure, we still see a migration from staff from the aging services side of the business to the acute side of the business, even when salary structures are the same. There isn't a silver bullet. It's not just an issue of wages. Even if we were able to pay 100% more than we're currently paying, our challenge is beyond that. It's about the jobs. It's about the culture of our organization. While I think it's important, I still think that there are things that we need to do to really be that employer of choice. Any other questions, or to the folks that typed those in, is that a fair answer? You accept that? All right. Well, again, feel free to type in additional questions, and I'll try to work through those. Strategy number 8 is just making sure that you are fully leveraging the funding options that are out there. Again, I talked a little bit about the Nursing Facility Scholarship Program through the Department of Human Services. This is something that our peers in other states would kill for. It is an outstanding cost-based, non-capped reimbursement program. We also have, the Department of Health has a number of programs. The Summer Healthcare Internship Program, which is going to be starting up soon here. Deadlines for that program are rapidly approaching, I believe. And then finally, as organization, one of my roles for the organization is to look at funding opportunity with foundations, with philanthropy out throughout the state. And one of the things I would say is over the course of my last 14, 15 years with the association is there hasn't been a lot of interest in funding aging in society. That is changing. And my challenge for folks is if you were to get funding, because funders are starting to come to us and ask, how can we help? If you had funding around a workforce strategy, what would it look like? What systems do you need to have in place as an organization to take advantage of funding should it come? Because I believe it will in the course of the next couple of years. So be thinking about that, be positioning, making sure you have a 501c3 that's ready, making sure that you know what it is you're asking so you're not chasing grant funding of someone else's vision and desire, but in fact your own. Some of the key themes that we're seeing emerge around what that might look like in the future: funding for better jobs. How do we add additional staff supports or new staff training models? How do we change the field? What new careers are out there, from health support specialists to other examples and tests? How do we get beyond where we've been, and how do we get funding for that? And then finally, pipeline enhancements. How do we get more people interested in our position? From K-12 strategies to changing the narrative of our career ads to volunteerism, which is a great segue into that strategy number 9. What do we think of volunteerism as a workforce development strategy? Every year I am always amazed when I look at that giant check that the Healthcare Auxiliary of Minnesota shows what the volunteer engagement looks like in Minnesota. And I'll just pause there and give you a quick personal example. Last summer my mom had a knee replacement, and we drove up to the hospital where she was going to have her surgery. A volunteer valet parked her car, which was really important for her. She was having a hard time walking. As we walked into the hospital, a volunteer greeted us and asked us if we knew which clinic we were going to. As I was waiting for my mom, another third volunteer came up and asked me if I wanted a Wi-Fi password and a cup of coffee because I was going to be there a while. While my mom was in prep, she had a fourth volunteer that stopped by to make sure she was warm enough and asked her if she wanted a magazine. Those are examples of where volunteers can truly enhance the experiences that the people we serve are experiencing. So strategies around volunteer directors, targeting where we can seek out these volunteers. We have a lot of high school students looking for career and resume building. We have job changers that are looking to get into an organization one way or another. We have retirees, boomers that are looking for purpose in this next chapter of their lives. And how are we asking them or inviting them in to provide some of that? And where do we begin to track where we get those referrals and great friends from? So my big picture message here is, for a relatively small amount of investment, we get an awful lot out of volunteers as a workforce strategy. And if you don't know what the Healthcare Auxiliary of Minnesota is, go and check out their website. It's an organization we help support along with the Minnesota Hospital Association. Right now the hospitals are owning this territory, and I would love to see older adult service providers really begin taking a full use of this field. Strategy number 10, recruitment strategies. This is our opportunity to get out there and really change that narrative of the positions we have open, to expand our marketplace, to be intentional about who it is we're trying to attract. I was with a provider this morning, and a shout out to the Hamlin office. You know, the vast majority of our workforce is female. How do we get beyond that? How do we begin targeting different communities of people and really be intentional about that? For some of our communities throughout Minnesota, particularly that western half of Minnesota, even if every single eligible person became a caregiver, some communities still wouldn't have enough people to be providing that service, to be providing the services that society is going to need. If that's the case, strategies quickly move to people creation, new Americans, immigration reform. How do we begin onboarding those folks in a meaningful, successful way and get them employed in our field? Where do our current outreach leads come from? Are they existing staff? Are they referrals from churches or schools? What metrics do folks have to begin tracking that? And if your organization is not currently in possession of a workforce benchmark, dashboard, some sort of list of things you're going to evaluate yourselves on as it relates to workforce, I would encourage you to begin setting those metrics. What is your current turnover? How long does the position stay open? What does that look like in your organization? If you're not sure what to start tracking, just start tracking something. Let's get it started. Most organizations today are beginning to put in line item budgets for workforce recruitment and retention and staff training in a way that they haven't in the past, because things are getting real out there, and this has to be a priority as an organization. It also has to be a priority within your leadership team. Even if workforce retention or recruitment is a priority, how are you evaluating managers or supervisors around retention? That would be a great question to begin asking as a leadership team. One of my favorite TED Talks, or TED speakers, I should say, is Simon Sinek. And here's I think your final piece of homework for my session today, which is go back and watch Simon's talk on the Golden Circle. It's a TED Talk. It's about 14 minutes. It'll change hopefully how you approach not just leadership, which is his general focus, but how you approach how you talk about the positions you have in your organization. We've heard that story about how back when the greenhouse folks posted a job for a nursing assistant, they didn't get a very stellar response from the community, but they posted the Shabazim job description and what that looked like, and they were overwhelmed with applications. We have amazing positions, and everybody out there talks about what they are. We have 2 FTE RN positions, full-time, night shift, day shift, whatever. Some of you talk really well about how you do what you do as an organization. You know, we're a Christian organization based in Catholic faith, yada, yada. And that's important. It's important for people to know how it is you approach your work. But the most important thing, and this is what I think, I won't repeat Simon's talk, but I'll encourage you to think about his talk from a workforce lens. The most important thing that I could give you advice on today is to begin thinking about how you can talk about why it is you exist. Why should someone want to come and work for you? What are your values as an organization? What is your purpose in being? And if you can connect with people on the why, those are folks that will stay with you, that will work in a variety of different capacities, and really be an outstanding resource for your organization going forward. As an organization, workforce is obviously really important to Leading Age Minnesota, and we've been asking members questions for the last year or so around what's the most effective workforce development strategy you've seen implemented, and what were those results. And there's been a whole host of ideas, themes that have emerged. One of them is retention is key. Some people will say, we don't have a recruitment problem. If you look at a 50% turnover rate, we have a retention problem. If those people stayed with us, we'd be fine. If you don't have a retention program, don't worry about a recruitment strategy. You got to stop that bleed before you look at PT. Bold new thinking is needed. If we don't change things, nothing is going to change. And then that third bullet around being part of something bigger, everything we do impacts our greater community. And I don't know that that transfers when we talk with our stakeholders around workforce. So for example, if we were able to pay, imagine that nursing assistant that you have working out there, that home health aide that's doing a great job. If we were able to pay that person a livable wage, if they were able to work one job instead of 2 or 3, what would their family life look like? How would that investment help society? How would their security and safety and, frankly, their tax base to society improve? And how do we talk about our investment in caregivers as an investment in our communities? I think that's a challenge that is only answered at the local level, and I encourage you to be working on that. Building partnerships with education, workforce centers, really key. And we also ask people, what are short-term and long-range benefits? What does that look like? Because people will say, well, we need immediate help in the short term, and we also need things to be working on in the long term. For short-term activities, I would encourage you to look at career promotion activities, changing the narrative of your marketing message, identifying new tools that you can launch in your organization, and beginning to track some of that data. For the long term, implementing healthy workplace practices, experimenting and being creative and responsive to your staff and the people that could be your staff around new job descriptions, building those education partnerships with K-12 and beyond, and opportunities to expand that pie through pipeline development. As an organization, these are the 6 things that we are working on in the year ahead, a mix of both long-range and short-term implemental activities. If you have questions about that or want to see more, feel free to let me know. All of this information will be housed on our Workforce Center website. Again, it's accessible at leadingagemn.org. And if you want to take this conversation in person, in the last full week of June, we will be hosting a workforce conference where we currently have about 21 different education programs that we're in process of developing. Conversations around employee engagement and accountability. How do you approach that onboarding practically? What examples are out there around flexibility, new Americans, staff support, funding options, volunteerism, impacts of different regulations and workforce legislation that might pass this session. So keep that on your radar screen. And with that, Catherine, maybe I'll throw it back to you to see in the last couple minutes we have here if there's any other questions I can help answer.
There is one from Mary Jo who says, do you see any more deliberate focus on linking the care facilities to the community services? Local or nursing
With
programs?
who?
Pardon?
With who?
With, let's see, do you see any more deliberate focus on linking the care facilities to the community services? Local or in-community nursing programs become less available each year. Often very low-income clients need these services, but there's no incentive for healthcare service providers to provide them, or minimal. Has BD given any thought to this challenge?
I would say yes, absolutely. And the hardest part about that is that it really happens on that local level. Part of the disconnect that I think we're experiencing is that connection between organizations on the local level. So when that's not happening, for example, I think the Minnesota State Colleges and University system has been incredibly responsive. And I think that those home and community-based service providers have not been at the table in the same way as some of the other providers, in particular the hospitals. You know, when they say things like, we're going to move away from LPNs, the system moves away from LPN education. If we're not at the table to have that conversation and to push back and say, here's what our community really needs, people are going to move forward. You know, the world is run by those that show up. So the challenge that we have is we can do some work on the systems level from a statewide perspective, and we do. But really, that conversation has to unfold at the local level. Other questions?
Any further
comments?
questions that you need clarification?
If not, I would thank everybody for their time and for joining us for this webinar. If you want to reach out to me directly, feel free to do so at Leading Age Minnesota. And with that, Catherine, I think I'll maybe turn it over to you to talk about what's coming up next.
Thank you so much. Many thanks not only for your informative, helpful, very impressive PowerPoints presentation, and thank you for the questions that came in. And to the audience, really a big thanks on the patience with the technical difficulties. Me personally, as an older baby boomer myself, it's very affirming to know that there's people out there working on these tricky problems. In closing, the continuing education certificates are available for today's webinar. It's a self-submit certificate and has been pre-approved by the Board of Social Work. These are free of charge for members of MGS and $25 for non-members. To obtain this free benefit, please consider joining MGS. The application is available on the website, and an annual membership is only $75, which translates into the cost of the CEUs for 3 webinars. The CEUs for the other 8+ webinars we host each year will be free to you. Additionally, video recordings of all past MGR webinars are posted on the MGS YouTube channel as a members-only benefit. And also the PowerPoints and handouts are on the website too. We would love to have your involvement. Watch for your evaluation survey that will pop up when you exit. It will also be emailed to you tomorrow. Remember that completing the survey is required for you to receive your CEUs. There are a few groups at facilities that are participating, and if they want a CEU certificate, the supervisor or person completing the survey after the webinar should list each staff person and their email in the survey question about the CEU certificates. That is the only way we can assure that each person who wants a CEU gets one if their name and email appear in that question. Next month's webinar is Urging Minnesotans to Face Aging by Patty Cullen from Care Providers and Jody Boyne from Leading Age Minnesota. This will take place at noon on April 9th. And also, don't forget, as Adam mentioned, to join us on April 24th for the MGS annual conference entitled Designing Our Destiny, Aging Aid for Sissies, Challenges, Opportunities, and Affordability. Keynote speakers will be David Durenberger, retired U.S. Senator, and Nick Mezzacapa. Early bird registration ends soon on March 31st. And you can register again at the website, which is mngero.org. So on behalf of all participants today, a big thanks again to Adam for sharing his expertise and thoughts with us. And thanks all of you too for joining us today, and have a good one. Thank you.